this has been the most incredible and most perfect, most fitting introduction to Costa Rica that I possibly could have had. It's just been so wonderful. The wildlife here, it's just insane. And I mean, the flora as well as the fauna, the proximity to the ocean, it's just, I mean, it's like a little piece of paradise on the edge of Central America.
Hey everyone, I'm Tim, and I've just finished a 9-month odyssey around Latin America. Now I'm reopening my diaries, and this time I'm bringing you along with me. Week by week, country by country, all the colors, all the craziness, all the food, all the music, and all the splendor. 9 months when each morning was a new adventure. The road was my companion, and Latin America cast its spell on me. This is my Latin America Diaries. Welcome back to Latin America Diaries. I woke up at the Bamboo Hostel in David, which is Panama's second largest city, and then walked with my luggage the couple of blocks down to the corner with the Pan American Highway, where I flagged down a minibus headed for the border with Costa Rica. The day before, on the bus from Panama City to David, we had passed a group of people protesting along the highway. I'm not entirely sure what they were protesting about, but when I reached the Costa Rican border, there they were. Whatever the cause was, it seemed to involve some sort of march towards the border. And that was when I encountered the rather unusual setup of the Panamanian-Costa Rican border. Leaving Panama was straightforward enough. There was a small immigration counter where I received my exit stamp and continued on my way by foot. And then entering Costa Rica, however, was a little bit more complicated.
So that was an interesting experience because when you cross the border from Panama over into Costa Rica, you have to pass passport control in Panama. So you exit Panama and then you enter Costa Rica, but you don't actually pass passport control right there and then. You need to take a taxi 5 kilometers up the road to passport control. And then once that's all done, then you make your way back to the border from where the buses leave. So it's sort of like you go all the way into Costa Rica by 5 kilometers, get stamped, come back, and then you can actually continue with your journey. And the other thing is that while I got, when I got up into Costa Rica to get my passport stamp, they also wanted to test me for malaria, which was like a finger prick test, a bit like a cholesterol thing. So I'm negative, but apparently it's a concern in Central America during the wet season.
Once I was into Costa Rica, 2 things immediately stood out to me. The first was the difference in the road network. In Panama, the highway had felt very American. It was a real motorway system that traveled through the country. Once I crossed into Costa Rica, the road became a single carriageway with 1 lane in each direction. Somehow it suited the scenery perfectly because it felt less like traveling through a transport corridor and more like traveling through villages hidden amongst the jungle. The second thing I noticed was just how green everything was. Costa Rica is astonishingly green. Everywhere you look, there are forests, palms, vines, mountains covered in dense vegetation. In fact, if you pay attention to this backdrop in this episode and the next, you'll notice that the color palette is predominantly green, and there is one reason for that, and that is rain. Costa Rica receives enormous amounts of rainfall. I had already experienced a bit of that the day before when I was traveling from Panama City to David and we drove through a thunderstorm on the highway. Admittedly, I was traveling through Costa Rica in June, which is right at the start of the rainy season, but Costa Rica's rainy season is a particularly long one too. Depending on the region, there are only a few months of the year that could really be described as dry. For much of the rest of the year, conditions range from wet to even wetter. While traveling on the bus, I also noticed something else amongst my fellow travelers, and that was a pair of Mormon missionaries. The Church of Latter-day Saints is particularly active in this part of the world, and all through Central America, I was to continue to see Mormon missionaries carrying out their work in the region. Eventually, the bus dropped me in a small settlement called Barrio Inmaculada, where I climbed into a taxi for the next leg of the journey to Quepos. Quepos is the main gateway town to one of Costa Rica's foremost attractions, the Manuel Antonio National Park. I was almost there in a place that I had been looking forward to visiting for a very long time. Another thing that I noticed was, looking at the map, arriving in Quepos, I had been traveling on a bus for about 4 hours since the Costa Rican border, but I was already about halfway across the country. Costa Rica is a fairly small country, but believe me, it packs a lot into that space. Manuel Antonio National Park is one of the major natural attractions on Costa Rica's Pacific coast, and over time a small tourist town has grown up around it. The catch is that accommodation close to the national park tends to be more expensive than in Quepos, the larger service town between the national park and the highway. Most budget travelers choose to stay in Quepos and commute in each day. The advantage of staying in the town of Manuel Antonio, however, is that you are staying right next to the rainforest. Fortunately, I had found a reasonably priced budget option called the Blue Morpho House. It was a small guest house slash hostel nestled amongst the trees. The guest house itself was fairly basic, but it was comfortable enough for the few days that I'd be spending there. It's named after the blue morpho butterfly, one of the most iconic butterflies of the Central American rainforest, and one that inhabits this region. Costa Rica is one of the most expensive countries to travel in Latin America. It's a result of its relatively stable political climate, relatively high standard of living, and well-developed tourism industry. As a result, you'll notice that traveling here tends to be much more expensive than in other parts of Central America. Costa Rica's national currency is the colón. However, the United States dollar is also widely accepted here due to the large number of American tourists that arrive in Costa Rica every year and the country's close ties to Washington. As a result, the two currencies circulate alongside each other and operate at an official exchange rate. It's not uncommon to walk into shops and see behind the counter there are two tills, one with colón and one with dollars in them, and it's quite common to sort of pay in one currency and receive change in the other and vice versa, so the whole thing's very straightforward. After checking into the guest house, I headed out for a place to eat dinner, and I found a local place called a soda. Now, this is not referring to a soft drink. This is actually a type of eatery in Costa Rica. They're called sodas, and it's sort of a bit like a cafeteria or canteen where you can find simple budget-friendly meals. The food tends to be fresh, reasonably healthy, and far cheaper than the restaurants catering to tourists. That evening I had a casado, my first true Costa Rican meal. A casado, it's a funny dish because the name literally translates to married man. And in Costa Rica, it's essentially the country's version of a classic home-cooked meal, the sort of thing that you'd expect to find on a family dinner table. Meat and 3 veg, if you like. A typical casado consists of rice and black beans, a serving of grilled or pan-fried meat, such as chicken, beef, pork or fish, along with salad and fried plantains on the side. The next morning I decided that it was time to slow things down a little bit and it was time for a day spent at the beach. Also, as I mentioned, I was traveling during the rainy season, so you take sunny days where you can get them. I headed down to Playa Playitas, which sits at the western end of Playa Espadilla, the main beach closest to Manuel Antonio National Park. Getting there was easy. The same local bus that had brought me up from Quepos runs all the way to the entrance of the national park, stopping at the beaches along the way. And I spent most of the day there not really doing very much at all. I stretched out on the sand, I swam in the warm Pacific Ocean whenever I felt like cooling off, and simply enjoyed being there. Palm trees lined the beach, the water was beautiful, and although storm clouds drifted around on the horizon from time to time, the weather held up remarkably well. One of the great things about traveling in the wet season is the lack of tourists, and so I basically had a whole section of the beach practically to myself. Behind the beach, monkeys leapt through the trees, giving me my first real taste of what makes Manuel Antonio and Costa Rica so special. When this country does nature, it does it exceptionally well. Later in the afternoon, I wandered toward the eastern end of the beach where a small headland separates the shoreline from the surrounding rainforest. There were signs warning about crocodiles in the area, which seemed like a fairly good reason not to go wandering too far into the jungle by myself. As the afternoon turned into evening, a group of local guys started playing volleyball on the sand just back from the beach, creating these fantastic silhouettes against the palm trees in the fading light. Meanwhile, a handful of beachfront restaurants began setting up tables for sunset dinners. I ended up chatting with an Indian-American couple who were there on their honeymoon, and they were about to go out for one of those dinners, and the setting was just magical. As darkness fell, I headed back to the bus station where I caught the bus back up to the village of Manuel Antonio, went to the soda again for another cheap and healthy dinner, and then called it a night. If you're enjoying these postcards from paradise, please consider giving this video a like, subscribe to my channel, and share it across your social media channels. And if you're really enjoying these videos, please tell your family and friends about it. It really helps me grow this YouTube channel and an audience and a community around it. The next morning, it was time to head out to Manuel Antonio National Park. I headed down to the corner again and took the same bus once again towards the beaches, but this time all the way to the end of the line where it dropped me off right near the entrance to the national park. Now, Manuel Antonio National Park is one of Costa Rica's greatest draw cards, and although I was there in the wet season, and I've already said that I didn't see that many tourists around, but what tourists there were in that part of Costa Rica at that time, they were all concentrated right there at the entrance of the ticket office for the national park. It's therefore recommended that you purchase your tickets online in advance, and then once you're at the ticket gate, you can just walk through into the national park, and immediately you are immersed in one of the most biodiverse regions in Costa Rica, in Central America, and indeed the world. The day began sunny, as many days do during the rainy season, although the clouds would gradually build throughout the afternoon. The national park sits on a beautiful forested peninsula that juts out into the Pacific Ocean, and it's absolutely packed with wildlife. One thing that I would highly recommend, if your budget allows, is hiring a guide to walk you into the national park. They don't need to stay with you the entire day, but what they will do is sort of show you where the wildlife is, because a lot of the wildlife is sort of hiding in plain sight, but it's camouflaged against a lot of the jungle. The guides carry these spotting scopes, and they can really point out certain things to you that would be very easy to miss otherwise. They can even line up your phone or your camera with the spotting scope so that you're able to get the perfect photograph of these animals as well. So if your budget extends to that, I would highly recommend that. The park itself is very accessible. There are well-maintained trails and boardwalks running through much of the forest, making it easy to explore without having to bush bash your way through the jungle. Along the way, we spotted a small species of deer resting quietly in the undergrowth. We saw Sally Lightfoot crabs, the same colourful crabs that I'd seen just a couple of weeks earlier in the Galapagos Islands. We found a baby boa constrictor wrapped around a branch, almost perfectly camouflaged against the surrounding vegetation. This was truly my introduction to the incredible world of Costa Rican wildlife. There were brightly coloured lizards basking in patches of sunlight, strange-looking grasshoppers hiding amongst the leaves, and tiny crabs somehow climbing their way up palm fronds and tree trunks. One of the highlights was spotting a sloth high in the canopy. I think it was the first wild sloth that I had seen since visiting Tayrona National Park in Colombia about 6 months earlier. Deeper in the forest, you could hear the unmistakable calls of howler monkeys echoing through the trees. Although actually seeing them proved much more difficult. There were also enormous butterflies with striking yellow and black patterns on their wings, similar to some of the species that I had seen earlier in Mindo in Ecuador. We passed strange fungi growing on the tree trunks, ant colonies burrowed into the sand, and bright green lizards that blended so perfectly into the foliage that I would never have noticed them if somebody hadn't pointed them out. And that's exactly where it helps to have a guide here, because a lot of these animals, you just would not see them if it wasn't pointed out for you. It's not like a zoo, it's a true national park, but these animals are just like, the forests are teeming with animals all around you. And yeah, you really need someone to sort of show you where to look. We also spotted a small tree snake perfectly camouflaged against the brown branches. It's amazing how many animals you would simply walk past without ever noticing if somebody didn't point them out. Eventually, I made it down to Manuel Antonio Beach. It's a beautiful stretch of sand, although the water can be a bit rough because it drops away fairly steeply. Around the shoreline, there were lizards basking in the sun, while others perched up in the surrounding trees. The beach is absolutely gorgeous, and it's somewhere that you could easily spend a whole day relaxing. I just went for a bit of a swim and enjoyed the scenery, and then that was where I really started to see lots of monkeys. In this case, they were the white-faced Capuchin monkeys, one of the most iconic animals of Manuel Antonio National Park. They seemed to be completely at home here, scampering through the trees, leaping between branches, and generally causing mischief wherever they went. From there, I continued up onto the headland, and this is where Manuel Antonio really comes into its own. Standing there looking out across the rainforest-covered coastline and the Pacific Ocean beyond, it genuinely feels like something out of a Robinson Crusoe story. It's one of those places that seems to be too beautiful to be real. You can make your way down onto one of the secluded beaches on the headland, which is believed to have once been used by the indigenous people to this region as a launching point for canoes or other watercraft. Then you loop back around the headland and return towards Manuel Antonio Beach, passing even more of the Capuchin monkeys along the way. It just felt like paradise. On the way back, we also spotted other types of wildlife, more monkeys, leafcutter ants carrying their bright green fragments of leaves back to their nests, and a strange mammal that looked a bit like a badger. I later learned that it was probably a white-nosed coati, which is common in Costa Rica. We also spotted this striking red and green grasshopper hiding among the vegetation. Again, the kind of thing that you could walk past without even noticing. As I was reaching the entrance to the national park and about to leave, came one of the most special moments of the day. I passed a place where earlier in the day I had seen a sloth high up in the trees, but this time it had moved and it was almost within arm's reach. Seeing a sloth that close was pretty special. This was exactly the kind of tropical paradise that I had imagined Costa Rica to be. At the same time, I also found myself reflecting on how long I had been traveling. This was about the 8th month on the road, and I was starting to miss routine. Not necessarily homesickness, but just sort of like regular places to eat and sleep and that kind of thing. And I sort of found myself reflecting on how amazed, or how much more amazed I would have been with these sites and Manuel Antonio National Park generally if I had visited there at the start of my trip versus at this point. But even so, what a place. It was just spectacular. I simply loved it. I made my way back to the Blue Morpho house to pick up my luggage and then head back down to the bus stop. Now, one of the great things about the buses running between Manuel Antonio and Quepos is that selected buses actually don't stop at Quepos, but they continue all the way through to San Jose, the capital of Costa Rica. So rather than changing buses in Quepos, I simply waited for one of the through services and climbed aboard. And that journey is the starting point for my next episode of Latin America Diaries, coming to you as a special episode this Monday. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and I'll see you then.